Buenos días a todos. Pleasure to be here with you all. And let's see if I adjust my glasses. This whole still
I'll
getting
need them
used to
later,
these.
yeah.
So, so Jaime, great to have you here, and you're an ideal guest to have this conversation for multiple reasons. But let's start kind of from the basics. So, you're the CEO of CEMEX. You were it's kind of what sworn in. Is that what they do? They swear you in. So no. So you started April of this year. But CEMEX is probably one of the original Mexican multilatinas to go global. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this transition. But of note, especially because we're at the U.S. Spain Chamber event, you're the first non-Mexican to lead CEMEX. As a Spaniard, this is actually, you would think it's a natural transition, but this is actually a big deal in Mexico. I keep hearing el primer no mexicano liderando una de las grandes empresas mexicanas. So please tell us about this transition into your new role as CEO.
Yes, great. Well, just very fast. I'm from Madrid. My wife and I, with our kids, we've been expats for 25 years. We lived in the Middle East, Europe, the United States, Latam for the most part. Becoming CEO of CEMEX, a heavy building material company, originally from Mexico that went global, is a total honor. I was not expecting that appointment. It got me by surprise. I was leading CEMEX USA as the CEO of the company based out of Houston. And it's just an honor for my wife and I to be leading this fantastic organization that has taught me so much and giving us and my family great opportunities. So I'm there to serve the board, our shareholders. Stock price since I took over increased 65%, very lucky. But now it can go down, so we need to deliver and do great together with my team. And I keep learning every day, so it's awesome.
Investment grades just this year, right?
We got that back in end of 2024 after crossing the desert. That was very tough since 2008 with the world collapse and our value chain collapsed in many parts of the world. Yes, we're in great shape now for growth, profitable growth.
So if you sketch out what CEMEX will look like now under your leadership, and CEMEX is known as having, long tenures for their CEOs. So as you sketch out what the years ahead look, now after 120 years up to now, so however many years you have as CEO, whether it's 5, 10, or another 40 years, what does that look like?
How about now? Yeah. So what it should look like is a company that creates shareholder returns. That's it. As simple as that. We need to create shareholder value. We're not an NGO, and we are a company that has very important values around safety, integrity, and sustainability, but not for the sake of, but because we do want to create shareholder value. So I see a company that will be, for the most part, concentrated in serving our customers in Europe, the United States, and Mexico. Been divesting from some emerging markets, but that's where we're going to be operating, and we will continue to be what we do best, producing cement, cementitious, ready-mix concrete and aggregates, serving the construction value chain, and leveraging technology in the value chain, upstream and downstream, which is something that CEMEX has always done quite dramatically.
So just before we move on to start drilling down on some specifics, but help us finally set the table. CEMEX today, how many employees do you have? How many countries are you operating? Just big picture.
It's a $16 billion company, 45,000 employees, doing business in the Middle East, pieces of Africa, across Europe. We're very large. We're very large in the U.S., the third largest cement producer, fifth, sixth, seventh largest aggregate producer, number one ready-mix concrete producer, number one in Mexico. Still present in other Latin countries and very strong in the Caribbean region.
And in the U.S., because actually before we started the panel, we briefly chatted, and we were saying that the U.S., however, things are a little slower because of the construction industry is just of a slowdown in the U.S. Is that unique to the U.S., or are you seeing that across other markets as well?
2025 is a interesting year. It's a transition year because many countries went through political change and many new administrations took over. And when those things happen, policy changes and fiscal policies and public investments also change. So we see we have mixed feelings in Europe. We are enjoying significant growth in Spain, Czech Republic. Germany is waking up finally. A stable UK, a difficult France, a very strong Czech Republic, I said that, and Poland growing, but not at the speed as it could, because it's not using European funds yet to invest in infrastructure. The US is soft, infrastructure is doing great. We see a lot of data centers, Javier. It's mainly residential that is pretty weak because of high mortgage rates. But that'll improve end of 2026, I think. Mexico is going through a political transition. It always happens every 6 years. Next year is going to be a much better year, and the key is going to be how Mexico and the U.S. deal with the renegotiation of the free trade agreement. Mexico has a brilliant opportunity to become the competitive partner, manufacturing partner for U.S. consumer. And there must be collaboration in areas such as security, drug dealing, and a few other things. But I'm very optimistic, and I think that if both partners do well, that could be very good for Mexico.
So starting to get granular. So the cement industry it is a hard to abate industry, but there's been a lot of great strides. I mean, a lot of awareness of of doing better and for the environment and decarbonizing. But there've been great strides in the decarbonizing. And tell us more about what the role CEMEX is playing globally as an industry leader.
Yes, the cement value chain is a hard to abate industry. But we're making very significant progress. CEMEX is leading in many ways. First, we're engaging with governments because, building on what Javier said, in our industry, we cannot decarbonize without regulation. And we don't have that regulation in place everywhere. So through our associations and directly, we're working hard with governments to set up the right regulations. The private sector moves much faster than governments. And we need to help them write the letter of regulations to support that decarbonization. The other aspect is venturing with partners from financial sectors, startups that bring technology and innovation to accelerate decarbonization. CEMEX was one of the first companies setting up a CEMEX venture with our own money. And it's great because we're partnering with startups, bringing the new technological innovation that's going to allow us to decarbonize at a cost that society can afford. Because if you think about it, we can decarbonize today installing carbon capture, but the price of my products would have to be hyper high. And think about affordability of informal housing in LATAM and in emerging markets. They cannot afford that. We need to bridge the gap between today and when that technology becomes, in the cost curve, affordable. So the way CEMEX is co-leading with others within the industry and outside of the industry is by partnering, developing technology that would make decarbonization affordable for society, and also profitable in the sense of that decarbonization should not destroy value, and the private sector should thrive in that environment, as well. And then leading internally, because we launched a business strategy, which is Future in Action. That's how we called it internally and externally for communication purposes and alignment. It's under that future in action strategy that, we're managing the business, putting decarbonization, water management, and biodiversity at the core of our business strategy and shareholder value creation.
So actually, I'm glad you mentioned Future in Action, because I was preparing for our conversation. I saw that a lot has been made about Future in Action. Can we get a little bit more granular on what exactly it means, both internally and market-facing?
Yes, Future in Action is a strategy that looks like this. We set up SBTi 1.5 Celsius curve targets for 2030. 2050 is net zero. And for 2030, what we did was a top-down and then a bottom-up approach. And we define for every cement plant and ready-mix plant worldwide their targets to meet the 1.5 Celsius curve target by 2030. The other aspect then was to identify the levers that we can action right now before using carbon capture, transportation, and sequestration. And those are very much related to the circular economy. So that's a big part of our decarbonization effort. And the other aspect is changes in incentives, in compensation. So we introduced for the 150 top managers of the company a compensation scheme that includes a variable short-term and long-term compensation based on our CO2 reduction targets. So it's a whole system. And then during our meetings every month, we review in detail those KPIs. Are we making progress? Are we lagging behind? And the good news is that as we introduced Verta, which is our brand for low concrete products and low CO2 concrete products, low CO2 cements. So as we introduce them, we've seen great progress. First, because there is a pull effect from the market, and second, because we're pushing. And as of today, for example, in Europe, before carbon capture, we are achieving already our 2030 target. And not because it was a greenwashing target. No, it's because we have the legislation accelerated, we had the financial support, and we had society's demand for green products faster than anywhere else. And we are decarbonizing, creating value to shareholders in Europe. And so our CO2 per ton of cement reduced by 15% since 2020 on a scope 1 and by 18% in a scope 2, massively moving to renewable energy. And so it's working, and we're one of the leaders in the pack. So that's Future in Action in a nutshell.
So you mentioned circularity, which there's increasing conversations in the industry on circularity, and is obviously very relevant to the topic today. Walk us through what that looks like on a granular level for you, for CEMEX.
Yeah, it's awesome. Who generates household waste in this room? Right. How shy you are. You need to wake up. All of you. So what do? We take your household waste and we produce fuel. Can you imagine the beauty of that? Because before we were doing that, and unfortunately a lot of waste ends up in landfills, guess what happens? Methane. That's even worse than CO2. We talk about CO2, we should be talking about methane. What we do is we co-process. We get your waste, commercial, industrial, and household waste. None of it hazardous. It is when you landfill. And we produce what is called an RDF, refuse-derived fuel that looks like paper. And we use that as fuel in our kilns, replacing coal and petcoke. So that's one great example. And we are recycling so much waste. To give you an example, we are taking 60% of Mexico City waste, co-processing it in our kilns around Mexico City. imagine how much CO2 we are preventing by displacing coal in our kilns, and at the same time cleaning the city and preventing landfill generating methane. That's a great example. The other example is recycling of demolition construction waste. We don't think about that, but one of the largest waste stream is demolition waste. And we like building with concrete because ready-mix concrete is 100% recyclable. And so what we're doing is getting that waste, and then we are recycling it to produce again aggregates that we then reuse for new ready-mix concrete mixes, and also as aggregate base for road construction. So that's another good example of circularity.
So I asked a couple of my colleagues in preparation for the discussion today. I asked a couple of my colleagues from our environmental team and our construction team, what questions would they ask of you? And so of course they geek out on this to a level. So one of the things that, on this question, they're asking, how does this impact the life cycle of concrete, and how does it then compare to other building materials once it goes through all these changes that you're mentioning?
Yes, that's a great point. Okay, what does it mean, the life cycle? If we want to decarbonize the construction value chain and think about infrastructure and buildings do emit a lot. Javier, you referred to that, right? Buildings are very energy, they consume a lot of energy. We support designing infrastructure and buildings based on life cycle assessments. What this means is that from the design phase, we need to use building materials that would allow any building or infrastructure to be recycled 100% at the end of its life. And that might entail that what it looks is expensive upfront is not the case. What it looks very cheap upfront, it becomes very expensive. So we are advocating for governments to demand life cycle assessment to provide fair competition for building materials based on life cycle assessment and the EPDs, environmental product declarations. If you look upfront and you compare timber frame in the US with ready-mix concrete, with bricks, right, steel, and so on, what we are advocating is use the life cycle assessment and tell us throughout the lifespan of infrastructure or building which one provides the most resiliency to climate change, by the way, right, and the best MPV from a financial investment standpoint. And let's promote fair competition. And then tell me, under the life cycle assessment, which one provides, which designs and building materials combined with the construction technology, right, which one delivers the lowest CO2 footprint. And that's what we're advocating, and that changes completely how we design, how we consume building materials, and how we build. That's what it means.
So that's interesting. So on this life cycle analysis, maybe just for us non-technical people, or the layman, if you will, can you share an example or two of, particular projects we could kind of
Okay, I knew you were going to ask me the question, and this is where I need my glasses. Let me see if I can read it. I will only read that name because I don't want to make a mistake. And because this is the Spanish-U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I'm going to give you an example of the first ready-mix concrete pavement that we've been able to provide in Spain under the life cycle assessment. Allow me to put on my glasses. There you are. Because I don't know exactly where it is, but this is the construction of the Yecla Caudete section of the A33 highway, 16 kilometers between Murcia and Albacete. And this is the first time. In Spain, we like asphalt. We don't build ready-mix concrete roads. Who has ever been in Texas? Carla, you live there. Javier, we became great friends in Houston. It's all made of ready-mix concrete. Why? Because of the life cycle assessment. That's it. No more. So that's a great example. And what it does is that it puts to compete asphalt and ready-mix concrete throughout the lifespan. And we won. Mathematically, we won. And we proved that it is a much more resilient infrastructure, much more durable, and with much less CO2 footprint.
So, Climate Week always leads to very lofty pledges, if you will, by many companies. And as they say in Spanish, de lo dicho a lo hecho hay un trecho, no? And Climate Week certainly is one of those weeks where that's never truer than during Climate Week, I think. So what is CEMEX actually doing to kind of hold itself accountable and to measure these climate changes, making sure that it translates into, real results, real projects, it's seen in the materials, and your impacts on the communities?
Yes, look, first thing I want to say is that CEMEX will not change our objectives because of political changes. We adjust and we will adapt on how we execute. But we're not a bunch of hypocrites that, depending on who sits in the White House or in any other government, we're going to abandon our principles. Society needs to eliminate methane and CO2. Climate change is here. And we know how to. And our industry and the private sector move much faster than governments. And again, our industry will not decarbonize if we don't get the right regulation in place. That's very, very clear. So with this mandate, first what we're doing is progressing fast in Europe because Europe provides the right legislation. And also in California, in the US, because we do have that legislation in place. Everywhere else, we're progressing based on profitability and shareholder returns. And when the TSR is there, then we do invest and we execute, okay? So that's how we're adjusting to the idiosyncrasies of every country, every market. But to provide you examples, we've been growing our Vertua brand, low CO2 ready-mix concretes, exponentially. I want to highlight 3 projects. One in the United States, the Texas Medical Center in Houston. Carla, you're familiar with that building, where we casted a massive cast of ready-mix concrete with 30% less CO2 per cubic yard. A flagship office building in Warsaw, in Poland, that used also our Vertua Classic brand. And then the San Diego State University in California. So even in the US, we do have customers, designers, who do want to reduce their CO2 footprints. And the likes of Microsoft, Google, Apple, they are all asking us to collaborate to provide green products for their data centers. And we are working with them, designing the next generations of very low CO2 ready-mix concrete. So we're moving very nicely, and our indicators speak by themselves. They're public, they're audited, and we are held accountable for delivering on what we say.
So in closing, because I suspect we're winding down, but for those of us in the room that are not in the industry, tell us what you see as the biggest opportunities, but also the biggest challenges for your industry and for CEMEX in particular.
In this space, so the opportunities are this: by leveraging, by using traditional levers to decarbonize, meaning circularity, waste recycling, replacing primary fuels over time, So that's one aspect. By reducing something that's called clinker, which is the raw material to produce cement, clinker factor per ton of cement, using new technology, very innovative technology that we're bringing to market, micronization, activation of other raw materials without CO2, right? And then much more energy efficient operations using artificial intelligence, which we're doing a flagship project in Balcones in Texas, and that is generating 15% to 20% yield increases, and that's awesome on energy efficiency. We can decarbonize, creating shareholder value. The issue is going to be how do we bridge the gap between when we get there, which means around 430 kilos per ton, to zero. And for that, you mentioned, Javier, carbon capture. Today, carbon capture is not feasible, fully stop. And although we do, because it destroys shareholder value. Although we saw Heidelberg, one of our competitors in Brevik, Norway, bringing to life the first carbon capture and sequestration in the North Sea project. That happened because it was subsidized by the Norwegian government, 80% OPEX and 80% the CAPEX. Anyone can do that, but governments don't have the money to subsidize carbon capture for all cement plants in the world. Therefore, we need to work very hard with our partners to bring new technology to reduce massively the CAPEX and the OPEX cost of carbon capture. And that will take time. Between now and then, I personally promote nature-based solutions. There are many, and they will allow the emerging markets to decarbonize at the pace they need and preventing significant sacrifices that society cannot afford in emerging markets. And we need to be mindful of what Europe can achieve, the US can achieve, and emerging markets can achieve, because the social and economic levels and implications are very different. And we need to be mindful worldwide of what it means. So the opportunities are there, and we just need to continue walking the talk, executing, right, delivering, being accountable, right, but always creating value to shareholders and society.
So in closing, and we'll finish with this, and as they say in Spanish, para que no se quede nada en el tintero, anything in that you'd like to share with the audience as to what you see the road ahead for the industry, for CEMEX in particular, especially it relates to Latin America and the connectivity Europe and Latin America.
No, nothing more than these are exciting times. Uncertainty is the norm. We're never going to have stable markets, transitions. We just need to learn to adjust and adapt. And I think that the world is doing a great job. Today, the world is a much better world than what we had, World War I, World War II. There are conflicts here and there. There are geopolitics everywhere, but I think that private sector is resilient, and we just need to adjust. Personally, I'm learning every day, I'm growing, and I'm having a lot of fun. So let's have fun, and let's do great for our families, friends, and society, and yeah. So thanks for having me, and
well, thank you.
I'll see you next time.
El primer español liderando una empresa gigantesca mexicana.
Sí,
Mucho
sí,
éxito.
pero aprendiendo mexicano rápido. Chinga su madre.
Órale.